Folks, Donald Trump was just stunned by a surprise loss on Super Tuesday in the state of Vermont. We can now call that his Republican challenger, Nikki Haley, will go on to defeat Donald Trump in Vermont. And Trump has underperformed across the entire country on Super Tuesday, coming in with far less votes than the various projected polls and averages that exist. Here's the call from interactive polls that Nikki Haley has won. If you go look at the specific number that she won by in Vermont, that is, it's 49.5% as of right now, enough to call the Vermont primary in favor of Nikki Haley. But let's take a more broader look, not just at Vermont. And look, to be fair, Donald Trump has won in the primaries in all of the other states, although recall he did lose in Washington, D.C., which we called over the weekend. But as Eric Feigelding talks about here, Trump has underperformed by a devastating negative 21% tonight in Virginia. Trump is underperforming versus polls. This is a consistent trend that we've seen happening in multiple states now. And as Eric states, either polls are especially broken or Trump's momentum is broken, or both. And so if you just take Virginia, for example, folks, the 538 average had Trump winning by 49 points, but ultimately when the results came in, Trump only won by 28 points, a significant disparity right there of 21 points. And we're seeing that across the board. And when you take a look under the hood, if you will, and look at certain exit poll results from Super Tuesday, you start to also see the same type of patterns we've been talking about here on the MeidasTouch Network. So, for example, when asking Virginia voters, are you part of the Maga movement? Only 31% say yes, 59% no. And that to me is also statistically significant because Donald Trump is saying that the Republican Party is now 96 to 100% MAGA and that he does not want any moderate Republicans or moderate conservatives in the party. When you look at North Carolina, for example, as well, ask the question, are you part of the MAGA movement? 39% say yes, 54% say no. And these are the Republican primary voters, of course. Then when you ask Virginia and North Carolina Republican voters, let me be clear, we're talking about Republican primary voters here. Is Trump fit for the presidency if convicted of a crime? Even though the 53% is such a ridiculous number that they would still support him if he was convicted of a felony, for example, to try to overthrow the results of a free and fair election. 40% of the Republican electorate say no in Virginia, and 32% in North Carolina would not support him. Some other warning signs for Donald Trump in North Carolina from Nikki Haley voters. And one of the things that was very clear there was that these Nikki Haley voters, yes, 43% were voting for Haley, but 56% were voting against Donald Trump. And when asked if they believe Donald Trump is physically and mentally fit to serve, 66% of Nikki Haley voters say no. And folks, this is some unprecedented data where you have a quasi-incumbent or incumbent-styled person here. Donald Trump's the leader of the Republican Party, but he is, losing lots of support again from these moderate conservatives, moderate Republicans. From North Carolina as well. What would your feeling be if Trump wins the nomination? 25% say of Nikki Haley voters say they would be satisfied. 73% say they would be dissatisfied. And then this all-important question, would you vote Republican regardless of who the nominee is? 81%. Let me repeat that. 81% of Nikki Haley voters say they would not vote for the GOP, regardless of who the nominee is. Let's take a look at what Molly Jungfast is saying here as well. And she's looking at the exit poll numbers from California, North Carolina, and Virginia right here, saying, will you vote for the GOP nominee in November? And as Molly Jungfast says, I'm sorry, but these numbers are going to be a problem for Trump unless they're somehow incorrect. Here's Jessica Tarlov on Fox. Here's how she's describing the results that we're talking about right now and seeing in the Republican primary. I'm going to show this to you, and then I want to start talking about how President Biden's doing. And not only is President Biden exceeding his expectations, exceeding the polls, but he's exceeding what President Obama was getting in on Super Tuesday back in 2012. But first, play this clip of Jessica Tarlov.
You look at the exits for GOP voters tonight who won't guarantee their vote for the nominee. North Carolina, 35%. Virginia, 36%. California, 33%. That has been consistent, that there's 30 to 50% of people who don't want Donald Trump but identify as a Republican or are voting in that primary. How can Joe Biden and his team make the case, talk about some of the things, of course, you talk about on your show, Larry, about the economy, to up those optimism numbers, which are going in the right direction. And there's always a lag from results to how you feel about it. To talk about immigration, clearly he wants to. That bipartisan border deal is going to be a big deal at the State of the Union, and other non-traditional democratic issues.
But I think
You go to Manu Raju from CNN, also discussing in a post some of that exit polling data that I've just been discussing here, how 81% of Nikki Haley voters say they're not an automatic vote for the GOP, and 66% of Haley voters say Trump is not physically fit or mentally fit to be president. Tommy Tuberville, the senator, MAGA Republican from Alabama, goes on the attack to attack these moderate conservative, moderate Republicans and calls them Democrats. That's because they're Democrats. And as we posted in response, I'm sure the Republican strategy of calling moderate Republican voters Democrats is going to work out great for them in November. Here is Karl Rove speaking on Fox about the general election weakness problem that Donald Trump has. Play this clip.
The high command of Team Trump ought to be concerned about unifying the Republican Party, because as we see in the in these states, a third of the vote in Virginia, 43% of the vote in Massachusetts going to Nikki Haley, a quarter of the vote in North Carolina. Maine has now dropped down to about a quarter of the vote, but it was 31% for Nikki Haley. Vermont, 48%. There's still some work to be done to unify the Republican Party.
Well, if you talk about unifying the Republican Party, I'll show you a comment that Donald Trump made in just a moment. But let's take North Carolina, for example, where in their governor's race, let's take a look at who their candidate is for the Republican nominee for governor. Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson and Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein prevailed in their respective primaries and will face each other in North Carolina's governor race. Well, who is Mark Robinson, who is now the Republican nominee for governor in North Carolina, which, I mean, President Biden lost North Carolina in 2020 by 70,000-ish votes. But here's who's now one of the top of the ticket people, in addition to Donald Trump, in North Carolina, someone who's a literal Holocaust denier, someone who says that gays are the end of civilization, someone who called school shooting victims prostitutes, someone who said shootings are karma for abortion, someone who called the civil rights movement a communist plot, someone who's made all these horrific and anti-Semitic statements. And in terms of trying to unify the Republican Party, here's what Donald Trump had said when he was speaking in Richmond, Virginia, about moderate Republicans not being welcome. Let's play this clip.
And they say, always trying to demean, well, MAGA really represents 48% of the Republican Party. No, it represents 96% and maybe 100%. We're getting rid of the Romneys of the world. We want to get Romneys and those out.
Get rid of Romneys and those out. So if you're a moderate Republican, if you're a moderate conservative, you are no longer welcome there at all. Let's just take a look at some of the data that here. Let's talk about President Biden, the margins that he's won. Let's just compare it to Barack Obama from 2012. So President Biden, to Obama in 2012, just for reference. For example, you look at Alabama, President Biden won with 90% of the votes, Obama with 84%. You look at Arkansas, Biden with 90%, Obama with 58%. Massachusetts, Biden 82%, Obama 81%. North Carolina, Biden 88%, Obama 79%. Oklahoma, Biden 73%, Obama 57%. Tennessee, Biden 93, Obama 89. Texas, Obama 88, Biden 86. Vermont, Obama 98, Biden 89. So you see those results right there, and I think pretty impressive numbers. And then you look at the numbers that President Biden won by in, say, Virginia, Iowa, North Carolina, Tennessee, Vermont, Maine, Arkansas, and Texas. We're talking about 94%, 91%, 90%, 96%, 89%, 93%, 93%, 87%. I mean, there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. This is not, folks, a spike the football moment for pro-democracy. I just want to be focused on what the actual data is now that we have these much more statistically significant data sets, that I think it's important that we're focused on the actual data. The same way we here at MeidasTouch Network were explaining why there was not going to be a red wave in 2022, because the data simply was not showing it. When you look at the actual data and not these media narratives, I think it's very clear what's happening here. But folks, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the pro-democracy community. That's for sure. I think it is important that there continues to be outreach to moderate conservatives, moderate Republicans who value the democracy, because this election, I believe, is about democracy versus dictatorship. It's about normalcy versus chaos. And it is about, are we going to support our allies, or are we going to cave and become subservient here to Vladimir Putin and other authoritarians? Those are the stakes. But again, a big loss for Donald Trump right here in the state of Vermont. I mean, again, he did win the other states in the primary, but he's certainly not hitting the expectations. And when you saw, for example, in Virginia, it was far less than what any of those projections were going into it. We'll keep you posted and updated with more information. I know I threw a lot of data your way, but I hope that's what you appreciate about this network versus others out there who just want to focus on narratives and yelling and all of that stuff. That's not what we do here. Hit subscribe. Let's get to 3 million subscribers together. Thank you so much for watching our coverage on Super Tuesday 2024. We'll continue to be here with more breaking news as it develops. Thank you for watching. Shout out to the Meidas Mighty.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.